All right, so I am hanging out currently with Josh. We got Dean and Jeff from Visor with their hat collection, their Visor collection. Just kidding. That's Visor with a Z, Vizor. How's it going, Dean and Jeff?
Doing really well. Thanks for having us.
You guys have never heard hat jokes or visor jokes before, right?
No, no, it's first time. Yeah, that was the
Yeah.
very first one.
Oh.
Actually, I remember the first time I did hear it though, legitimately the first time I did hear it was on one of your podcasts. I kind of slapped my forehead when I was, how did I not think of that? That's really good.
All right,
Uh,
so speaking of Visor, let's just pretend we know nothing about you guys or your services, your company. Would you just tell us what is Visor?
yeah, sure. So, firstly, Visor is a software solution and it helps schools and districts manage their Chromebooks and other IT assets. Over the last 10 years, we've worked with lots of districts implementing their processes and their workflows into Visor and, where possible, automating those processes. At a high level, we're providing is a single pane of glass where you can go and see all of your IT assets, whether they're Chromebooks, iPads, Windows machines, projectors, smart boards, that single place. So you're not jumping from Google Admin Console, spreadsheets, student information systems, Apple School Manager. It's that single place to see all of those assets.
Okay. Yeah, we've talked about this some before. Like, I currently use my library catalog system
Mhm.
for some of my tracking. And then I'm also looking in Google Admin Console to match up some of those things. Even my wireless network, there's some reporting I can do in it, and I kind of attach MAC addresses across all of those things. So Visor pushes all that stuff together, but you can do Windows as well, right? Is there anything else you do? Windows, Chromebook?
Yeah, so the Windows machines, the Chromebooks, whether they're iPads, then any of the computing devices, bringing those together. So we're not replacing MDM solutions. So if you have those on the Windows side and configuration management solutions, they're great for what they do in terms of organizational units, group policies, pushing software down. What we're around is really the processes of managing those as assets. So taking those assets, knowing who has them, where they are, what state they're in. So how many are in use with students or staff or underutilized, waiting in rotation out for repair or reaching end of life. It's really the life cycle of those devices and the processes around them. And I think that's where we're different from a library system or even a spreadsheet, because it's really the processes of moving a Chromebook or any other asset from one state to another. At this time of year, then bringing all of those assets back in. So we've got workflows of simplifying that process of device collection, simplifying the process in a few months' time of getting those devices back into students' hands, and really reducing the time from minutes per device, bringing that down to, fractions of a second.
What are some of the unique challenges or the unique needs that schools have that you guys have been able to address? Number one, but number two, that kind of caught you guys off guard or maybe surprised you guys when you started having users report back with what this has been able to solve for them.
Yeah, I think that I mean our history for the past 30 years, we've been focused on enterprise vertical markets of all kinds. We've always had education space in there, or education clients, and that space represented on our client list. But about 10 years ago, when we started focusing on the education space and specifically K-12, one of the first things in terms of surprise that jumped out to me was the ratio, right? The ratio of text to end users in the education space versus text to end users in the enterprise space. So there in enterprise, it's like 1 to 10. So that always, yeah, it's still, even after 10 years, it's still surprising what tech teams have to do and how outnumbered they are by end users. Obviously, that being the student population primarily, and then faculty and staff. And so that was a big challenge. What can we do? So our mandate really is to simplify as much as possible the administration of those assets, and Visor's ability to quickly manage the processes that, like Dean was talking about, the check-in and check-out process, the ability to leverage non-technical users and recruit them to perform administrative tasks in the Google Admin Console, for example, with Chromebooks, without ever knowing what the Google Admin Console is. So that was our mandate: simplify this, allow us to use non-technical staff leverage them, teachers, librarians, media specialists who you never want to give, exposure to the Google Admin Console to, but how do we use them? How do we include them in our process? And so Visor, through again, that mandate with a single school district about 10 years ago, has provided that a very simple, easy to use interface, easy to the point of, again, non-technical staff being able to jump in and move Chromebooks from one OU to another, for example, just through a checkout process, which is a really cool and I think highly resonant sort of feature within the Visor platform, right? So tech directors and technologists in school districts are, how do we get this done without having to go to all these multiple sources, like Dean said, and I like to think that, and that's the feedback I guess that we get from our customers, that that's one of the features that really helps out in automating the processes.
So I'm curious. You said you saw an average or the kind of industry standard for businesses 1 tech to 10 users. What do you see, or do you have a number from education facilities that that tech to user, and by user I'm going to say student and faculty staff users? What's
Mhm.
that ratio look like in
Yeah.
schools that you're seeing?
Yeah, it's kind of all over the board, but like 1 to 100 would be an exceptionally well staffed
Sure.
technical school
Yeah.
district. So that really 1 to 100. So, but yeah, one to two, 250, 500. There's districts that we work with, and it's literally 1 to 1,000, which
That
is
but yeah, I'm raising my
yeah,
hand. My
yeah.
district.
So yeah, it's amazing to me to think about what it is that you guys have to do, with that number, like Josh, for you, one to 1,000. I mean, that's just a tremendous number of end users, and more importantly, and this is what Dean was just alluding to in terms of bringing the devices back in and then reallocating them the following year. That doesn't happen in enterprise, right? Like you're not doing
Right.
1,000 user turnaround every 9 months. You know what I
And
mean? And
and
3 months later.
and that handout and collection, like we're getting ready to do our collection now. That handout and collection is typically done in 1 day. Like my high school, we have right at 1,000 kids in my high school, and we collect. The seniors are already gone, so those devices have been collected. But just roughly say we collect 750 devices in about 30 minutes because of how we work that workflow. We actually distribute that out into the classroom. But if it wasn't for that methodology, it would take us forever. Like there's no there's not enough manpower in my department to do that. So yeah, that's where those efficiencies are super, super important.
Yeah, we had a district that I'm working with right now. Actually, they wanted to implement a new methodology for collection right now, or prior to Visor, they were using classrooms. So homeroom teachers would gather the devices and then they would be responsible for essentially doing a preliminary diagnostic, which to me is insane. And then having to get that to technology, and then technology, the tech department moving those devices into, collected OUs, or, whatever the OU structure is. I forget specifically in this example, but what they did with Visor is they implemented a process by which all the students were bringing this back to a central location, a gymnasium, I think it was, or an auditorium. And there's a person responsible for simply scanning each device as it comes in and checking it in. So the kids basically just walk in, drop it off, and walk away. Because of the integrations within that environment, Visor knows the student, because of the integration with the student information system. The integration with Google Admin Console means we have all of that data inside of Visor, right? All of the Chromebook information inside of Visor. So it's just scanning, it brings it right back in. So they're able to do this in bulk and much quicker than they would have been able to without Visor.
So you mentioned integration with student information systems. Can you give us a couple names of student information systems that you guys are rock solid? You work with, maybe they're one roster compliant interface. Can you give us a couple of those names?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll start with our official partner, and that's PowerSchool.
Okay.
So that's number one. But the other ones with which we have, the most experience, I'd say probably right behind PowerSchool is Skyward, followed closely by Infinite Campus and Aries. Those would be the big ones that I can think of just in terms of more experience.
I know I guess, Dean, you and I sat through a demo or something at some point. Maybe it was you too, Jeff. Letting a librarian move a device in Visor to say it's lost. And then it went ahead and did that Google Admin Console work to mark it as lost, as disabled. That's a pretty big deal to get to automate that. And then also in Visor to go ahead and say that something's damaged. And then on the tech department side, we could see within Visor what's under warranty, what's not under warranty, where it's at in the process of getting repaired, that kind of thing. Can you speak to those things a little bit, features that might stick out?
For me, the most important part about Visor is, again, simplifying that and recruiting non-technical staff and just simplifying the entire process. So in Visor, one of the cool things that was achieved was on repair. So this isn't necessarily a lost one, although that's a cool automation feature too, the ability to remotely disable a device once a student reports it as lost or stolen. And there's lots of ways they can do that, but it's a pretty simple process. Well, it's a completely automated process from the point at which the student identifies, reports their device as lost or stolen. But when it comes back in for repair, this was essentially, again, part of the original mandate from that school district that we started working with a long time ago. Was their librarians were getting sort of bogged down by the clunkiness of trying to collect that broken device or one needs repair, get the student a new device, allow the student to go back to learning, allow teachers to go back to teaching, or librarians to go back to doing what they were doing in terms of managing their processes. So Visor allows for an immediate check-in. So you scan the device and check it in. That can automatically create a repair ticket. And then that repair ticket can get automatically assigned to the appropriate tech resource, notify that resource that there's a device requiring repair, and then pick up or delivery of the repair of the device for repair. So that process, the simplicity of that, it's less than a single click insofar as all you have to do is check it in, and that kicks off all the processes behind. So not only
Great.
moving that OU, that device from, let's say, the grade level OU into in repair OU, it also creates that repair ticket. So nobody has to go to another place, open up another window, click 6, 7 times in order to create a ticket. That whole thing has happened with that one process.
They're my two favorite features. And I think one of the reasons for that is that they can be triggered from the self-service portal. You could have a family on a Sunday evening say, hey, we've lost this device, go into the self-service portal, report it as lost. Then Visor, as Jeff mentioned, will trigger those processes, disable the device, create a chargeback, calculate that charge. So if you have a different calculation mechanism, maybe the first lost device is free and the second one is sort of 50%. So it'll calculate all of that and then notify the parent where they can get a replacement device. And all of that can happen on a Sunday evening without a tech being involved. And that's the thing I really like. So the mandate, which Jeff mentioned about reducing workload, because we appreciate that there's very limited resource within these schools and districts. The more we can automate, and I love that Sunday evening approach. And likewise, for a device which needs a repair, self-service portal, create the repair ticket, or trigger those emails, trigger the costs based on whether there's insurance, malicious damage, all of those things, all happening automatically, reducing steps and tasks which IT need to do on a Monday morning. There's enough things going on Monday morning, so the more of those we can reduce is what we're looking to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can think through like the several, again, if I'm using my library system for this stuff, and then the librarian's reaching out to say lost, stolen, damaged, whatever. We had the student go to a Google form to fill out stuff that they're getting a loaner. There's just several things pieced out. And not to mention, then the follow-up is assigning that fee in our SIS. That's another piece that you guys can take care of for us too. That's very cool.
Yeah, those are like those processes too. Each one of them, if it's not kind of locked down, represent gaps wherein these devices can be lost. And that's when we get into like ROI is pretty quick to recognize if you're reducing the number of devices that are lost. I know Dean has an example of costs associated with just a small number of devices going into a missing situation. Like you don't know where they are. If you don't have a kind of a process without gaps, then the devices fall into the gaps. You lose, 20 or 30 devices, and that represents tens of thousands of dollars gone from the district. It's a very, so with this kind of lockdown sort of and efficiency, it reduces those gaps. It fills those gaps completely so that there's no loss, right? So a librarian collects a Chromebook from a student, let's say, just as an example, or a teacher does, and then their attention gets drawn somewhere else. Well, Visor knows as soon as that device is scanned, Visor knows exactly what the situation is, can update the data and the status of that device immediately so that if and when, not if, but when the librarian or that resource gets distracted by something else, you're not allowing that device to fall through any gaps.
Yeah. Give me the top 2 pieces of advice that you would give an IT admin when it comes to Chromebooks when they're trying to wrangle this the circus that can be Chromebooks and rollout and collection. Give me your top 2 pieces of advice.
I'd say the first one would be to consider the complete life cycle of the device. I think one thing which is often overlooked when a school district purchases Chromebooks is, well, what are we going to do at each stage of the device's life cycle? Taking it right back to like acquisitions. If we're going to purchase these using a particular funding program, then how are we going to ensure that only students which meet the criteria of that funding program are going to get these particular devices? How are we going to keep track of that? Through allocation, which we've discussed, end of life. When's the end of life of these devices? Is it when the AUE date comes up, 5 years after, when it hits a certain amount of repairs? And who's going to be responsible for these tasks which come out of these life cycle stages? So mapping all of that out upfront and tying that to an inventory, whether it's a spreadsheet or a tool like ours, and I think that's an important thing for school districts to do. I think the other tip is have a look at zero touch enrollment. We hear some really good feedback about that. So we don't sell Chromebooks, but I'd say speak to your Chromebook resellers about zero touch enrollment and whether that can reduce your time to getting those devices out and get those enrolled in the Google Admin Console. We work with Chromebooks which have gone through ZTE, so you can see them in Visor and start to allocate those out to schools and classes before they've even been shipped from the resellers.
It's funny you bring up ZTE. That's what, it's 3 years old, 2 years old, roughly. It's interesting to see that. First it was vendors doing white glove, and now it's Google taking that on with ZTE. And I think that was definitely a much needed advancement. And it's also interesting you bring up the Chromebook lifecycle. We interviewed Lucas last week in that PIRG
That was a
study.
dirty interview.
It wasn't bad. So Chromebook lifecycle is definitely something that's been a hot topic. And some of the new devices, the devices we just bought, are going to go till 2030 if they live that long.
You guys are going to hang out with us on future episodes, I know, of the podcast, but you guys are also sponsors of K-12 Tech Pro. So we're happy about that as well. So if you're listening and you haven't joined K-12 Tech Pro, make sure you get on there. Visor is on there, Vizor, and you can hang out, see what they're up to on there as well. If a person is listening and they want to know more about Visor, who should they talk to? Jeff, Dean, who?
If you go to visor.cloud, so with the Z.cloud / K-12 Tech Talk, then we've got a promo on there. There's some screenshots of what we do. You can schedule a demo. It'd be great to show you around in depth. So visor.cloud / K-12 Tech Talk.
We thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we really appreciate you sponsoring all the episodes and hanging out with us for, I guess, several more episodes, quite a few more episodes. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to our next time we get to chat.
All right. Sounds good.